Hello, dear listeners. If you're new here, we're Margin Mavens, and we are obsessed with writing in our books and sharing our thoughts with you guys. In this episode, we are talking about Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Canas, a gothic horror set in the 1800s of what would become southern Texas. It follows Nena and Nestor, two people who were separated by things outside of their control when they were young, and are brought back together when a war comes to their land. As usual, this video will contain spoilers, so please keep that in mind before listening.
Oh, do you want to go first?
I sure, yeah, I can go first.
Are you
Okay.
sure?
Yeah, no, I got this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so big and brave. Okay. So, as a daughter of a rancher in 1840s Mexico, Nena knows a thing or two about monsters. Her home has long been threatened by tensions with Anglo settlers from the north. But something more sinister lurks near the ranch at night, something that drains men of their blood and leaves them for dead. Something that once attacked Nena 9 years ago. Nestor believed that Nena, his closest friend and first love, was dead and spent the next 9 years running from that reality. But the Yankees invading brings him back to the ranch and back to Nena. But with the threat of war, will they be able to put their past behind them? Now listen. I First and foremost, this was just a very Mexican experience, and so I really enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm.
It it was great. Um I don't remember what I rated it. I think it was a 5 star. If I'm being honest, it was a 5 star. If not a 5 star, it was a 4.5. Um, my favorite character before we really dive into the whys and the whats was Nestor.
Mm-hmm.
He owned my heart
Mm-hmm.
entirely.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Um,
The only correct answer to that question, by the way,
yeah,
dear listeners.
is live, laugh, love, Nestor.
Yes.
I I really enjoy the work that goes into every sentence of this novel. There is not a single like chapter or paragraph that I was just like, "Oh, this is filler.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't something that is important. This is just something that was there." Every single page, it felt like I was underlining a line, I was adding something to like my list of quotes that I loved. Um I think just Isabel Cañas has such a way with putting her
Words.
words on a page
Mm.
that
It's
obviously
artwork.
not having lived in the 1800s, I was still able to like feel it and be there, and that was really cool. Um we're going to follow the brain dump, right? Immediately. So we meet them when they're young, right? We meet them when they're 13 question mark,
Mm-hmm.
and
Nena is 13.
they're both 13. I googled it cuz I
Okay.
was confused. Um but she's like sneaking out of her house at one point, and she goes to see Nestor in so for context, Nena and Nestor live on Nena's family's ranch. And especially back then, but even today, like they're still called ranches, but obviously it's a very different dynamic. Back then you had the, head honcho, and his family would live in basically the fancy house,
The big
right? So
house. Yeah.
if we're thinking American culture, kind of like a plantation, but not slaves. You just had workers that were getting paid, but they weren't getting paid enough to do anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had the family would be in like the main house. There was a very clear hierarchy in terms of this is the rancher's family, and then this is the vaqueros. These are the people that do the work, but they cannot like really interact. So Nena is that eldest daughter of the rancher. And so, from the get go, you have those expectations placed on her, but she didn't care. She was, you know, rebellious in the way that a kid could be, and not really knowing any better and not really caring about any better. And so, very quickly, she starts like she and Nestor are like attached at the hip. And one of the first lines that I wrote down was, his voice was like coming home. It loosened the unease that had curled in her chest all week, right? My immediate thought to that was like, oh, this romance is going to hurt. And it did. I'm sad that I was right. Um, but one of the things that I think that made Nena so relatable, not just I think to like that eldest daughter thing, but also just like to a like Latinx standpoint, is that idea of the parents' love feeling as though it was contingent based on you following their rules.
Mhm.
And so that was incredibly poignant and painful to be like told that so early on, because you knew it was really going to be the theme in terms of how Nena like walked the world, because she was always going to want that love and that acceptance, right? But she knew that it didn't ever feel like it was just going to be a blind acceptance, a blind love. And I think all of us can kind of relate to that to a certain extent of not wanting to, disappoint your family because you don't want them to see you any different, whatever the thing is, right? But it was really nice to see it put so plainly
Mhm.
on paper. Now, I knew that there was romance in this, right? But I definitely did not know how deep it was, even just from like 13-year-olds. I was kind of expecting it to be, I guess, how like a lot of 13-year-old love gets painted of like, oh, this is my person and this is exciting, but like I don't have a way to like put it into words. So to have them both kind of mirror each other's thoughts of like, this other person is my home, you know? And that was really painful because what I loved about Nestor's inner thoughts the entire time is he's very plain with his feelings. He doesn't try to, misconstrue them anyway. He's not like Tristan that we just read about, where he's like very plainly saying like all of these things that he loves about this person, but he's not admitting to the fact that he loves this person.
Mhm.
Nestor was very much like, this is my person, always has been my person, always will be my person. And so one night, as children do, they decide that they're going to sneak out and they're going to go and try to find silver. And they don't find silver, but
Mm-mm.
they find a vampire.
Mhm.
And this vampire attacks Nena and basically gives her susto, and she appears dead. For all intents and purposes, she looks very dead. And so Nestor kind of fights the vampire off, gets them away, carries her all the way to the house, brings her inside. And I think it was even really telling that he didn't step past that threshold. Like
Right.
he was like, Nena's in danger. I need her to be here. But it's like so ingrained in him that he is not meant to be part of that family, part of that fold. And so he still like stays outside. And
Right.
then the parents admittedly and understandably lose their mind because the mom ends up saying like, my daughter is dead. The father turns to look at Nestor and like yells, which I think is a reasonable reaction, but man, did it hurt. And Nestor flees, as I think any 13-year-old would do, and he's gone for 9 years.
Yep.
I have a lot of questions, or I guess I had a lot of questions about the premise of it all, right? Of why didn't anybody at any point decide to like mention to Nestor that like Nena was okay? Hmm?
Then why would they? They didn't want her. They didn't want him around her.
But, like, I'm not saying, like, well, I guess that makes sense because, like, all of the letters were written by the ranch owner
Yeah.
because they didn't write themselves. Alright, fair enough. I answered my own question. I got
They
there.
were already planning at the age of 13 for Nena to be
Mhm.
married off to some rich ranchero. Like, there's
Yeah, I guess
why would they then shoot themselves in the foot and make it difficult for them to be able to marry her off by telling
yeah.
Nestor that she's actually alive?
Yeah, I forgot that because he was receiving letters from his family, I forgot that those letters weren't actually written by them,
Mhm.
because I guess that was my whole, like, thought process the entire time is, like, if your family is writing you these letters, at no point did they think, like, "We're gonna mention Nena," and then I remember that they're speaking it through Nena's dad, and they're not gonna
Or her brother, yeah.
yeah, they're not gonna risk, mentioning Nena in any way to these people who are obviously overprotective of Nena. So, like, okay, yeah, I got there. So 9 years later, we run back into Nestor, who is dealing with his demons between the legs of random women and,
And
like
making money.
and making money. He's like, I've got no ties to making sure that not that he doesn't stay a good person, but that he doesn't have any accountability. He is like, I'm
Have to
gonna
work for one person and just continually make them money. He can take
yeah,
his skills and his talents and go and make money for himself.
yeah. And so he does that. He is sleeping with a ranch owner's widow. And what's kind of interesting, I guess, because it makes sense because she's not like integral to the story, and I understand that. But it was like I was always kind of half expecting there to be some sort of, I guess, conversation between them at some point, but he really just like wakes up from this like terrible nightmare and dips, and like we never see her again. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I wouldn't be able to tell you why I thought there was going to be like at least a conversation there. I think I'm just so used to like novels that have any sort of romance complicating it by including other people. But this one was a very plain and clear, like, Nena and Nestor, that's all we got. There wasn't like other things going on. Um I loved so many scenes from this book. The first one I wrote down was when she's teaching him how to write his letters, right? And I loved the fact that she does it, one, because she believes he has the right to know how to write and read and all of these things. But she also does it because she likes rebelling. At least at that age, she liked
Mhm.
rebelling against her mom. She liked being challenged. And so her mom is like, "Oh, like they have no reason to learn how to read and write, and you can't join the classes cuz he'll um make the other children like fall behind and whatever." And Nana's like, "All right, bet. I'll do it myself then." And she teaches him how to read and write, and the parallels between that and then later on Nestor teaching her how to shoot a gun
Yeah.
was wild because they're both showing something that is important to their status. She's able to teach him how to read and write because she knew how to read and write because she was expected to be, the wife of a ranch hand at some point. And he needed to know how to shoot a gun because of what he
Yeah.
deals with and all of these things. And so that was kind
Revenge.
of cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so anyways, the Yankees, which if you guys haven't put two and two together, the white people
Mhm.
decide that they want Mexico for themselves. They want to take over what would become Texas. And like, unfortunately, we know that they won. But in my head canon is that they didn't. And Nana unleashed vampires on them every single time they tried to come back. That is that's where my little Mexican heart
Mhm.
lies. But so they're creeping closer and closer, and so her father and like a couple other of the ranch hands start calling out for basically help. They're creating their own
Yes.
little militia to join the Mexican army.
Mhm.
And Nestor hears about it and he goes, "Okay, yeah, I have to go back. Like, that's my home." And so he goes back. He's kind of the like prodigal son. Everybody's super excited because no one really knows why he left. His grandmother kind of like flays him alive verbally, which only a Mexican grandmother really could do in the way that she does it. I was like, I get it. I understand. I know this feeling that she is inflicting right now. And so it doesn't I like that it didn't take long for them to have that reunion.
Mhm.
Like I was expecting to be drawn out a little bit more. I think cuz I'm just constantly thinking like other romance tropes, but I liked that Nestor gets there, walks in, sees Nena, and both of them are like, "Whoa, wait.
Yeah.
What is happening?" You know, because he believed she was dead, she believed that he just left, and 9 years have passed. And uh the hurt, right? And I think what was really nice was that when he has his freak out and he goes to his abuela, and abuela's like, okay, I now understand why you left, but you both are dealing with very different pain. Like your immediate reaction upon seeing her is like, oh my God, I'm so glad she's alive. I want to be right there. Her immediate reaction is like, you left me. I want nothing to do with you because
Yeah.
that hurt.
Right.
And I like that abuela was able to kind of like sit him down and be like, it's two different kinds of grief that you guys are dealing with. You're dealing with the like relief that she's alive,
Mhm.
and she's dealing with the you came back but it wasn't for me.
Right.
And just the conversations in this book were so good because they were never like stuffy. They had serious conversations. They talked about the things that they needed to talk about, but it flowed well, it was relatable. The audience could still learn something from these conversations, but it didn't feel like a TED talk, I guess, is
Right.
how some like dialogues kind of end up becoming a little too big for their britches. And they're like, it becomes a point where they're like talking directly just to the audience, but through a conversation. And I liked that you could feel the character growth through each conversation because he was like, "Oh crap, you're right. Like she's viewing it through a completely different lens than I am," and
Right.
all of these things. Um, Another character that I love was Beto. Loved him. Immediately wrote, "If something happens to him, I'm losing my mind." Right? I am not kidding you, listeners. The next bullet was, "I lost my mind."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so Nena has this need to prove that she is worth more than just being a woman that they can marry off, and so she decides that she is going to be a curandera, which is basically a healer, right? And so she's trying to like prove to her dad like, let me go with you guys, join this militia because you guys are going to need people that can cure, right? And he's like, okay, cool, but you're going to have bodyguards on you at all times, right? Which means obviously the people that are going to choose this bodyguard, right, is her brother and Nestor, Beto, and can't remember his
Uh,
other name.
uh,
Hmm.
Casimir?
Yeah, they all are like rotating shifts taking care of Nena, right? And what I really love is the like quiet jealousy that Nestor has of I'm gonna be like Beto and I'm gonna talk even when you don't want to talk, and I'm gonna fill the space because that
Mhm.
obviously seems to be working. Whenever he talks, you laugh, right? And he's like not coming
Mhm.
out and saying I'm jealous of this guy, right? But he's showing it in the fact that he's trying to emulate what this guy is doing, and it's just
Yep.
not working because she's pissed,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and uh um and then what I liked, and it really shows, it's so funny to me, is they start having like campfire stories, right? And so all these other vaqueros are talking about Nestor's like adventures, right? But obviously these adventures also dealt with sleeping with random women, right? And Nena gets jealous. And I
Yes, she does.
and I put Nena getting jealous is so relatable because what do you mean you didn't pine for me for 9 years and weep in loneliness? You know,
Mhm.
like she's like, I pined, I wept, right? And
Mhm.
because of their roles being so different, she couldn't just go out and sleep and find another person. You know, she is so heavily guarded and kept enclosed, right? She was like, I
Yep.
had to just like sit here and be sad for 9 years. And you were able to go off and be your own boss and sleep with whoever you wanted and like all of these things. You know, she's jealous, she's pissed, like all of these things. And I found it so relatable.
Funny. It was
Yeah,
funny.
it was good. It was good. You know, Mexican women, we're consistent.
Consistent in being inconsistent.
Yeah, we're so good. Um when they finally get to like the battle, right? I wasn't shocked that the Yankees were more brutal than they were expecting. I think the Mexican people were like, yes, these guys suck, right? But I think just like anybody, when you are facing a new opponent, a new enemy, right? It's a very common mistake to be like, okay, I have certain morals that I'm not going to break, which
Mhm.
means I'm expecting these people to also not break these morals.
Mhm.
You know, and so we end up having the stupid Yankees decide, okay, in order to win this war, what we're going to do is go directly for their camp that they have the wounded and the women and the people that can't fight
Yes.
back.
Correct.
um and it was such a like gross scene.
Americans, ma'am. They're the worst.
Yeah, it was really such a gross scene because to see it through Nena's point of view where she was also so confused and so distraught
Mhm.
of like, wait, but like there's only like women and dying people here. Like
Mhm.
the people here are no longer the threat. Um and Nestor obviously being who he is, gets off of his own horse and give puts Nena on the horse because his only thought is like she needs to get out of here, but she will not leave without him, and so thus comes the next montage of quite a few of the chapters where they are now just by themselves trying to get back to the ranch because they she was like, I need to go back. I now understand more about what's happening here. I need
Yes.
to get back to the ranch, make sure everyone's okay there. We left them unprotected. And he's like, okay, well, you can't go by yourself.
Right.
And then Isabel Canas really comes in hard with the gross scene where they're dealing with a what they believe is just a Texas
Mhm.
Ranger, which they're known ranches, and he's there. Nestor is like, okay, I need to deal with this guy, right? And he ends
Mhm.
up having a vampire turning into a vampire. Yeah. So the scene with the Texas Ranger known as the Rinches was just incredibly grotesque because it's not Twilight, guys. Instead of
Mm-mm.
being dead and laying somewhere and your body just kind of heals itself and then you look the exact same, right? These
Mhm.
vampires are terrifying. You know, maybe the only vampires I've ever dealt with in media that I'm like, I wouldn't want to deal with them
Correct.
in any way. And
Correct.
so they got no eyeballs,
Nope.
right? They look basically like they've shed skin and it's just kind of the gooey underness,
Mhm.
right? And grotesque. And so we really get walked through what that looks like. And I hated it. Would not recommend ever dealing with this situation. But it was so good because it is a gothic horror, right? And I
Mhm.
liked that the horror is constantly present because of the advancing Yankees and the threats to their land and all of those things. But it was nice to have just that like genuine like moment, you know, that genuine like susto of like, oh, these are the monsters that they're dealing with. Cool, cool, cool,
Mhm.
cool, cool.
Mhm.
So this monster beats the crap out of Nestor, right? Nena ends up being able to fight it off with a
Machete.
yeah, with a machete. Um Nestor's arm is dislocated, which brings up my second favorite scene of this
My
book.
only favorite scene of this. I mean, I love the whole book, but like favorite scene, top
Mm-hmm.
tier.
Well, because it's your favorite scene, you explain it because
Heck
I've
yeah.
gapped.
Heck yeah. Okay, so his shoulder is dislocated, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
Nena, and as we all know, when your shoulder's dislocated, you have to pop it back into place. That's just, like, if you don't do that, you risk long-term damage, and the pain will never go away. Nestor either does not realize that, or it never crosses his mind because she just starts flirting with him and being very.
And it's hardcore flirting, guys.
Yeah,
Like,
no, she's
it's
being
not
very
just like, oh, I think you're
seductive.
cute.
She like turns into like this beautiful Mexican siren, basically, of just
Mhm.
like teasing him and flirting with him, and he's just like completely gobsmacked,
Yeah, because it
right?
comes
Like
out of nowhere.
it comes out of nowhere. He's flabbergasted. He's like,
Mhm.
and he's enjoying it, and he's like fully focused on her and
Yeah,
on the
he's ready to actually
flirting.
do something about
Yeah,
it.
he's ready to just be like, okay, like, all right, let's go. Okay. And then out of nowhere, for Nestor anyway,
Yeah.
okay, because we all know it's coming. He
Mhm.
does not know it's coming. But out of nowhere, she proceeds to pop his shoulder back into place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he realizes that it was all a ploy
Yep. Yep. Yep.
to
Yep. 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 Yep.
get
Yep.
him distracted enough so he wasn't going to think of the pain that he was about to be under
Mhm.
while
Yeah.
having his shoulder pop back into place.
And just his inner monologue once again is just so good because you really see him like lose his mind from this because he's like, I'm in a lot of pain, but if she's down, I'm down. I'm not gonna tell her
Yeah,
no. But
right.
then even after, he's like, I'm almost embarrassed by
That he never, yeah.
about how easy it was for her. Because
It's
like we
he's
said
a
before, like
slut.
yeah, like we've said, Nestor has like slept around. No shame in his game.
Nope.
Not slut shaming in the slightest, right? But he gives her a body count. And he's like, I think like 18 to 20. And by
Yeah,
like 1800 standards,
he's a
man,
slut.
man was for everyone.
Yeah. He was
Like
sowing those oats, man.
and so I like that despite all of his history, right? Despite the fact that
He still
he's
gets all
got yeah,
flustered.
he's like, "Oh, that was like really easy for her." And I'm almost embarrassed about it. Um I like the fact that he comes to realize and really appreciate that she's a badass, right? Like he
Mhm.
is like, I'm still going to be here. I'm still going to protect. Right. But now it's no longer just on me to do all of that protecting. I can
Right.
rely on her to kind of, carry her own.
So I
Oh, so,
fibbed a little bit
uh huh.
because I said that was my favorite scene.
She's a liar. Uh
I'm a
huh.
liar. It's not my favorite scene. It is a great scene, but if I had to pick a scene that was my favorite, it would be a subsequent scene where Nestor is shaving and Nena is tasked with holding up his mirror, which is just like a really polished piece of steel or silver or something like that. And you get a lot of teasing between the two of them. It's almost as if Nestor has decided that, because this is after the shoulder dislocation and while they're on the road and all of that, he decides he's going to pay her back
Mm-hmm.
a little bit for all of her teasing and flirting, and he puts it on like a 10. And
Yeah.
boy, howdy, does she get flustered.
Yeah. Cause he also like teaches her how to fire the gun
Yep.
like after and like
Mm-hmm.
it's a good scene. It's a good scene.
That one is
I
absolutely my favorite.
yeah, I liked just the I'm a sucker for a good inner monologue, Like if a book can give me good dialogue, but then you get to to the people's brains and
Mhm.
they're able to talk about things in like such a succinct way, you've
Yep.
got me, you know,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I think
Isabel
as
Canas does
somebody
that
so
very,
well,
very well.
yeah, she does it so well where you can really follow like thought by thought of how they're feeling about a certain situation. And so they end up kissing. Ooh la la,
Smoochy smoochies.
right? And it's a very angry kiss because they're in the middle of an argument and then Nena kisses him and he at least has the forethought after to be like, "Oh, but she doesn't know what this necessarily means. Like I'm
Right.
ready. I'm all in."
Mhm.
But she hasn't thought past like what happens when we get back home, what happens
Mhm.
when, you know, the expectations of our social status come into
Correct.
play. And when he calls her out on it, she kind of like doesn't know what to say. And he's like, yeah, that's what I figured. And he kind of lets it go. Right. And they end up running into another group of people. Sorry, I'm trying to figure
Yankees.
out. Yeah.
Yankees.
Yeah. Well, I was talking about.
Oh, oh, oh.
Yeah.
See.
Yeah.
See, see,
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
the other
But
vaqueros.
yeah.
Yeah.
But before that, you're right. They do run into some more Yankees. And we find out that the Yankees are really the worst because not only are they going after women and the wounded, but they are also using these vampires as weed eaters. You know, they're just kind of revving them up and then letting them loose, and whoever they run into is kind of the problem.
Mhm.
And it really shows the like evilness of the situation,
Mhm.
which was tough. Um I loved that when they run into the other people, right? They have to pretend to be wife and husband. They're it's so funny to me, right? Because we're talking about how good these inner monologues are, how these characters are communicating so well, the audience really understands what's going on, right? These characters don't communicate with each other
Oh, no. No, no, no. Yeah.
worth a damn. You know, like they
If you are not a fan of miscommunication tropes, this is really
this is a tough one
this is gonna be a tough
because
novel for you to
I
read.
loved every second of this novel and even
Amen.
I was like, man, like this is really frustrating cuz
Mhm.
neither like so okay. So they are going to this group and Nestor once again having a little bit more like life experience is like I cannot just show up with you and everything is going to go swell. They are going to assume that we are either deserters or I have kidnapped you and I'm trying to take your ransom. Like it is not going to be a good thing. So we need to say that we're married. And she's like, "No, I don't want to do that." Right? Us as the audience cuz we got her monologues. She doesn't want to do it because she's currently in pain about the fact that he rejected her, right?
Mhm.
He hears, "I don't want to do it." And he goes, "Oh, she would never want to be with a vaquero like me." And I'm like, "Bro, she literally kissed you. I don't know where we're on a different page, but like she showed you she wanted to be with you. And because she didn't think past that point, you immediately were like, no, she doesn't want me. And that was incredibly frustrating. And so they go through this whole spiel with the other people. They pretend to be married. They have a really nice conversation when they're going to sleep. That is really good. Where she's like, that was not the issue. I have never had an issue with marrying a vaquero, all of these things. Um, So then they go back to being just by themselves, right? And they end up having a conversation about how he basically is telling her, like, I have money saved up. I can do these
Yes.
things, but I need you to be in it with me. I need you to weather the storm, be ready for those immediate consequences. You know, you have to be willing to stand with me. And
Mhm.
she's freaking out because she's like, I don't think that this is going to work. I don't think my parents will let me. And she's having this kind of spiraling situation in her monologue. Um, but ladies and gentlemen, they end up sleeping together, right? I'm not normally a fan of fade to black. I like I like some details, especially when we've been working up to that I guess, like, pivotal
Mhm.
moment, right? I'm not necessarily saying it needed to be Katie Robert level details,
Mhm.
right? But I do think that for the material, for the horror, I did like the Fade to Black. Was I a little disappointed? Will I probably try to see if I can write a fan fiction? Probably. But I liked it for the book. It made sense for the mood. Um the next day, he wakes up. She's still sleeping, right? And there are vampires afoot, Your Honor. And so he gets assault and he, you know, puts barriers up, stuff like that. But what I really loved and what stuck out to me was that he makes a point of putting a barrier specifically just around her as she's sleeping.
Mhm.
And I loved it because you know that in the back of his mind, he's like, if they somehow get through these barriers and they kill me, they cannot get to her. Stuff like that. Love that. Um, they make it back home. And man, do things just go bad quickly. And once again, if you don't like miscommunication, if you don't like lack of communication, these last few chapters are going to be a little rough. They show up, right? I'm, once again, just goes to communication. A lot of what happens when they first get back to this ranch would have easily been solved if they would have just sat down and had a game plan. You know, they kind of just show up at this ranch. She's wearing pants, right? And neither one of them was like, we're going to try to come up with a quick solution, a quick, here's some ground rules, like, we're going to, whatever. He is under the impression that they're all in. So he's not afraid to like be close to her and touch her and all of these things. And she's aware that she's kind of already afraid and backing up because she's like the reality setting in a little quickly. So her mom, which is like a Mexican mother on crack, really annoys me
Yeah.
because I guess it's because of the fact that like my own Mexican mother is so cool, right? Like I will brag on my mom for a second, but she's so cool. And so the fact that
It's also
not only
not the
does
1800s.
yeah, but like some Mexican mothers have not changed that far from the 1800s. And seeing other specifically like Mexican friends of mine and seeing how their realities are in 2024, my mom is super cool. She will not hear this video, and so I will not earn any brownie points, but the universe knows that I think she's awesome.
Mhm.
Um, but her mom really annoys me in these last couple chapters because before things obviously like resolve themselves because she clocks immediately that Nestor is standing a little too close, right? Doesn't even take a moment to like appreciate and say thank you to him because if we're going to be sexist, right? If we're going to say that Nena is the lady, she should not have to do anything, she should not be wearing pants, this man should protect her, all of these things, right? Homie should at least have been thanked. Thank you for getting my daughter home, you know, something like that. She's so beside herself with the fact that her daughter is wearing pants that she does not come to think about like what had to happen for them to get there. You know, and I just that was frustrating.
Mhm.
So they separate. Nestor goes to like talk to his abuela, all the things. Her dad ends up coming home, and her mom immediately is a rat. She's a rat because she knows that things are getting out of hand with Nena. She's like, we're losing control of her, whatever. Instead of having a conversation with my daughter about this, about the expectations, how this isn't going to work, right? I'm going to cheap shot her and immediately just talk to my husband and make it seem so much worse than it was, right? And so the husband is immediately like, my wife is upset. I must do something for my wife. And they both kind of shut Nana down. And then out of left field, which not really left field, I'm going to say more like middle field because we saw it coming, but it was still hurting. Her brother also becomes a rat and decides, I've been with you your whole life. I've spoken up for you when you needed to have a voice. I've helped you be part of these conversations, but I draw the line at you loving who you love. Felix ended up on my poop list very quickly. And so they're all having an argument. Her father decides, I'm going to go talk to Néstor because how dare he, right? He shows up at Néstor's house, right? His grandmother's house. He's sleeping because homie has just been on a journey through hell. He's sleeping, immediately goes outside. Father is like, how dare you besmirch my daughter's reputation? What was worse, and this is where miscommunication really throws a punch and hits you in the throat, is during all of this, right? Nena shows up and Nestor is like on the ground and he's like, please tell your father that we're engaged, right? Technically, they weren't. He talked about that he would like to be, but she didn't give him an answer. They didn't have that conversation. She ends up being gobsmacked because he's saying this in front of her father. So she kind of just stands there, kind of acting stupid, right? But like she's shocked. A lot of things are happening. I don't blame her for it, but man, was it frustrating. You know, to have them go through so much and then him be like, please just say this thing, say you're with me, right? Her being afraid not only of the expectations of what she was about to change, but also just like plainly afraid of her father. You know, like she was not somebody that was unaware of, you know, her father's voice and the father's anger. And so she doesn't say anything. Nestor leaves, right? And I was like, this man needs
Néstor
to
is
stop.
exiled, first of all. Don't make him sound like he left again, okay? He was exiled.
He could have stood at the property line, you know, like
He was exiled.
he is my favorite character. I'm not saying
Her dad was like, get the out of here. And when she didn't stand up for him, he was like, all right, deuces, and then walked away.
and so he leaves, right? Because he is exiled. And the subsequent monologues are very annoying on Nena's behalf. Because she's very much like, oh, I should have done something. I should have said something. You know, I was a coward. All these, like, all rightful, you know, self loathing that's happening. Right. But she doesn't voice these things. And I guess that was the part of like, just wanted to like pick up the book and shake her. Cause I was like, man, you're having so much character growth, but like other people need to be aware of this character growth. Like you're growing mentally, but you're not voicing it. You're not telling people, you know? And that was tough. So then frickin' Yankees, once again, the real evil of this story. They show up. She is such a badass. Like she doesn't hesitate. She's like, I'm not going to just be here as one of the women in this room, just hoping the men figure it all out. She grabs salt. She grabs the knives. She hands them to her cousins. She finds out that she can talk to the vampires. First off, let me back up a second though, right? I loved the little dog Boyle. Loved him. He was ride or die for Nena's little sister. Sees a giant vampire monster thing, doesn't hesitate, goes and bites him in the leg. Loved that dog. I was gonna raise the world on fire if something
Yeah.
happened to that dog.
Yeah.
And so Nena ends up becoming like the vampire whisperer. She's like, oh, because they bit me, like we have some sort of communication channel. Like I'm gonna talk to him. Vampire leaves, right? Because the whole crux of the story, at least when it comes to the vampires, is they're not like going out of their way to be these like vicious, bloodthirsty monsters that are just attacking willy nilly, you know? Like they're being basically prodded and poked and tortured and then let loose.
Yep.
and they have instincts. And Nena, I think, has that moment of realization of like, oh, they're just animals. Like they need to feed, they need to do these things, right? But they're not necessarily coming after people normally. Like they're coming after the bulls or the animals, and that's their whole thing. But they're being poked, prodded, tortured, left hungry, and then being sicked on the people. So obviously they're going to do what they got to do. So she has that realization, decides that she's going to go and take care of the other ones that they're like basically holding still, getting ready to release onto the ranch. And we switch over to Nestor's point of view again. And I liked, this is really where he got that number one spot for me, where he has kind of that realization of like, oh crap, like she has always been afraid of her dad. Obviously, that would not have changed suddenly, especially in that like high tense drama situation of she wanted to change. She obviously is capable of it, but that was a lot for a girl very quickly. And I liked his realization of like, oh, like she was obviously still afraid and I left again. And I think that's why, even looking back on it, knowing that he was exiled, I still view it as like he left, because he like drills that into himself. He's like, I really did just like walk away again. And so he comes back, uh shows people how to kill the vampires, which is really funny and cool.
Yep.
And then Nena is releasing the vampires, but she's like basically told them like, I'm cool with releasing you. You and I are homies. You just can't attack the ranch or else we're going to kill you. So they all leave, right? And then a stupid Yankee shows up, goes to attack Nena, and this vampire like swipes her out of the way, which, granted, she ends up really, really hurt because of this. But I didn't blame the vampire for it. Because he was like, I can't attack her. I gave my word, right?
Mhm.
But she's in danger, and the
Mhm.
person that's been torturing me is right behind her. Like, I need her out of the way, but I'm still obviously this strong, bloodthirsty thing.
Mhm.
So swipes her out of the way like a cat with a ball of yarn. She ends up hurt. Yankee ends up dead. He leaves. Nestor, once again, that parallel of bringing her back into the house. He actually steps forward because he's invited in by, I think, the mom, like tells him to like come in with her body. And Abuela tells Nestor like, hey, like you have to tell her to come back. Like you have to tell her
Right.
spirit come back. And I was getting really emotional, right? She comes back and she tries to sit up, right? And he's
Mhm.
like, he calls her Nenita, and I lost my mind a little bit because it was such a like, it's a nickname of a nickname, It was such a endearing thing to do, like in front of all these people, because they obviously hadn't had that conversation yet of like, what is gonna happen? Because they came back and there was vampires everywhere.
Right.
But then Nena finally shows, I think, that really fiery Mexican spirit, right? And she's like, if you kick him out, I'm gone too. And it changes the course of the rest of the story. And I just really, really I loved it. I loved the ending where like Nestor, makes his own house and sets up his own little ranch, and he sets it up onto this idea of like fair pay and not really like that hierarchy, right?
Mhm.
Which is cool. And then Nena one morning goes to get like water and she sees a vampire and they have a moment of little understanding, right? I still wanted her to keep them as pets, you know? I know it wouldn't have made sense, but I think it would have been fun. My little brain, my little rebellious Mexican heart is like 100% keep them as pets. Find out, and like if you could just talk to them, you don't even have to torture them, right? Be like, hey, you see those guys with lack of melanin? Get them. And then Mexico wins the war. The end. No colonization. You're making a face at me, but like, tell me that wouldn't have been a better history.
Yeah, sure. If vampires existed,
Well, I mean,
yeah.
the whole premise that created this book, right, was a man writing a letter to his fellow Mexicans and being like, oh, they're acting like vampires, you know? And what's super interesting, not to get super like geeky and English teachery, but like this letter exists like 100 years before like Dracula and before all of these like really prevalent vampire stories. And so the fact that like there's evidence of the word being used in Mexico 100 years before,
Mhm.
fantastic. Sick 'em on the white people.
I would argue that when they're talking about vampires, even in so much as the book title, like they're not talking about the actual vampires. They're talking about
Yeah,
the white
the
people.
Yankees.
Yeah. That's what I
Which for all of our listeners out there, when we're saying sick 'em on the white people,
No, you
just
don't need to justify this.
all
No.
right.
Because if anybody wants to take our words and twist them, they're more than welcome to.
All right. Have at it.
Like,
I tried to put a band-aid on something before it leaked, but it's cool.
no, because it's very much like when we talk about, men and like sexism, all that. Like, if you automatically jump to all
Oh
men,
man.
then you're also part of the problem. Like, so
Yeah.
no, we're not gonna
If
sit
our
here and
husbands don't mind it.
yeah, we're not gonna sit here and mince our words or careful with our words because you know there are real implications and consequences to colonization.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
it doesn't make sense to sit here and be like, oh, well, when we say white people, we don't mean all white people. No, like, we do. I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Because we're all sort of complicit in
Mhm, mhm.
colonization and racism. So
That's fair. Go off.
I'm not gonna sit
Can't
here
hear
and
me
be
snapping,
like,
but I'm snapping.
like, we're not gonna do
Um,
that.
but as my first introduction to Isabel Canas, this was fantastic.
You're spoiled. I need you to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was fantastic. I've got no words. I other than the miscommunication, right? But I think that almost made the like parts where it worked better. But I'm not a miscommunication girly.
No.
So if I knew knowing that, I'm pretty sure I probably gave it like a 4 or a 4.5 because I probably took points off because of miscommunication, even if overall the book was one of my favorites of the year. Um,
Hands
yeah,
down, this book is my favorite of 2024. It is September 22nd, 2024. I finished this book, what, a week ago, 2 weeks ago?
mhm.
Still my favorite of 2024, will remain my favorite of 2024. And that's saying something because we've read a lot of good books. Like
Yeah, this
just
year
for
was really good.
content, we've read a lot of good books. And like outside of content, I've still continued to read a lot of great books. But this one was hands down my favorite of 2024, without question.
Yep. Yeah.
There will be close second, third, fourth, like it's going to be a very tight race for the rest of those rankings going forward, but Vampires of El Norte, number 1,
Yeah,
no question.
it was good.
No question.
Um, so as usual, if you plan on reading the book yourself, the links and everything to do that will be in the bio underneath this episode. This has been another episode of Merchant Mavens. We appreciate you being here. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.